Tonight my heart whispers, and I, an echo from the past, confess. Feel the gentle mist of the Nile against your skin, the sacred incense of Egyptian temples drifting through moonlit chambers. The weight of golden jewelry settles softly around your shoulders as papyrus scrolls rustle like ancient secrets in the warm desert wind. If these confessions touch your heart, join us again and whisper from where you listen to us. Now, lie down, breathe in the frankincense and myrrh. Let us confess together through a world of eternal rivers and golden dreams. The Nile speaks to me tonight, its waters carrying whispers that only a pharaoh's heart can understand. I stand here on my palace balcony, the marble cool beneath my bare feet, watching the sacred river flow through Alexandria, as it has for centuries before my birth, as it will for centuries after my last breath dissolves into the Egyptian night. My hands rest against the stone balustrade, and I feel the pulse of Egypt itself through these walls. The river murmurs secrets in a language older than dynasties, older than the pyramids that pierce the desert horizon. Tonight, it tells me truths I have carried alone for 39 years of life, truths that weigh heavier than the crown of Upper and Lower Egypt combined. The incense from the temple of Isis drifts across the water, mixing sandalwood with sacred myrrh, and I breathe it deep into my lungs. This is the scent of my confessions, the fragrance of a queen who has loved emperors and birthed the future, yet stands here trembling like any mortal woman facing the shadows of her choices. I trace my fingers along the gold bracelet that circles my wrist, each hieroglyph a prayer, each prayer a memory. The metal is warm from my skin, warm from the day's sun that has set behind the lighthouse of Alexandria, that great beacon that has guided ships from across the Mediterranean to my shores. How many vessels have arrived seeking audience with Cleopatra the Seventh? How many have departed carrying pieces of my heart they never knew they possessed? The water laps against the palace foundations with a rhythm that matches my pulse, slow, steady, eternal. The Nile has witnessed every pharaoh's rise and fall, every dynasty's glory and shame. It has seen me as a child running through these very corridors with dreams of conquest and love. It watched as I grew into a woman who could charm Rome itself, who could make Caesar himself kneel before the mysteries of Egypt. But rivers remember everything, and tonight the Nile remembers the girl who wept alone in royal chambers, who learned that power comes with a price written in loneliness and blood. The water reflects the torches from my windows, golden flames dancing on its surface like the souls of the departed, like the ghosts of every decision that brought me to this moment in history. I close my eyes and let the night air caress my face. The desert wind carries the distant sound of temple bells, the soft chanting of priests performing midnight rituals to ensure Maat, the divine order that keeps Egypt balanced between the worlds of the living and the dead. Their voices rise and fall like the breathing of the land itself, and I wonder if they pray for their queen, if they sense that Cleopatra stands here tonight confronting truths that make even goddesses tremble. My silk chiton moves against my skin like water, like the gentle touch of understanding fingers. The fabric is dyed with Tyrian purple, that color worth more than gold, yet tonight It feels heavy with the weight of empire, with the responsibilities that have shaped every breath I have taken since childhood. The crown jewels rest in my private chambers, but I need no external symbols tonight. The Nile recognizes its daughter. An ibis calls from somewhere along the riverbank, its voice piercing the darkness with ancient authority. These birds were sacred to Thoth, god of wisdom and writing, keeper of divine records. Does it call to warn me, or does it sing the song of confession, understanding that some truths can only be spoken under stars that have watched civilizations bloom and crumble like lotus flowers in the eternal cycle of time? I open my palm and imagine holding the weight of all my secrets, the love that consumed me, the betrayals that nearly destroyed me, the moments of absolute power when I felt like a goddess walking among mortals, and the hours of crushing doubt when I wondered if I was nothing more than a woman playing at divinity. Each secret has its own texture, its own temperature, its own pulse of memory that beats against my consciousness like the wings of the sacred scarab. The river continues its eternal journey toward the great green, toward the Mediterranean that connects Egypt to the wider world, to Rome, to the men who have shaped my destiny as much as I have shaped theirs. Tomorrow, the waters that flow past my balcony tonight will mingle with salt seas, will carry traces of my presence to shores where my name is whispered in Senate chambers and soldiers' quarters alike. But tonight, this sacred moment belongs only to the Nile and to me, to the queen who learned to love without surrendering her throne, to the woman who discovered that even pharaohs must sometimes kneel before the mathematics of the heart. The water reflects my face in its dark mirror, and I see not just Cleopatra the conqueror, but the daughter of Isis, who carries within her all the longings and fears of mortal flesh, blessed and cursed with divine purpose. The incense rises from golden censers throughout my private chambers, each tendril of smoke carrying fragments of memory that refuse to rest in the shadows where I have tried to bury them.
Tonight, as frankincense mingles with sweet myrrh and sacred kaifi, I breathe in the ghosts of every love that has marked my flesh and soul with its particular brand of exquisite torment. I move through these rooms like a spirit haunting her own life, my fingers trailing across surfaces that have witnessed my transformation from naive princess to calculating queen. The cedarwood chests, imported from Lebanon, still hold the scent of distant mountains, but they also hold trinkets from lovers whose names history will remember and whose touch I can never forget. Here, a Roman coin that Caesar pressed into my palm during our first private audience. There, a pearl that Marcus Antonius removed from his own ear to place in mine during a night when passion made us forget the boundaries between Egypt and Rome. The smoke from the censers creates shifting patterns in the air, and I see faces in those patterns. Young faces, serious faces, faces that looked at me with desire, and faces that looked at me with calculation, wondering how much of my heart came with my kingdom, how much of my body came with my political alliance. The incense burns with herbs gathered from sacred gardens, blessed by priests of Pa, and prepared according to formulas that predate the pyramids. Each inhalation is a prayer, each exhalation a confession. My feet are bare against the marble floor, inlaid with patterns of lapis lazuli that form the sacred symbol of the Ankh, the key of life that every pharaoh carries. But what life have I truly lived? What existence has been mine alone, separate from the crown, separate from the expectations of a dynasty that stretches back through time like the Nile itself? I pause beside a mirror of polished silver, its surface reflecting not just my face, but the chamber behind me, the golden furniture and silk hangings that proclaim my wealth to the world, while hiding the poverty of intimate connection that no treasure can remedy.
The memory comes unbidden, rising with the incense smoke. I am 21 years old again, standing in this same room after my first night with Julius Caesar. The great Roman general sleeps in my bed, his weathered face peaceful in a way that Rome never sees. I watch the rise and fall of his chest and wonder if this is love or strategy, if the trembling in my limbs comes from passion or from the knowledge that I have just changed the course of history with my flesh and my intelligence combined. Caesar stirs in his sleep, murmuring words in Latin that I pretend not to understand. But I understand everything. The weight of his ambition, the loneliness that drives him to seek solace in foreign queens, the way he touches my skin as if trying to absorb the ancient wisdom of Egypt through my pores. When he wakes, he will be the conqueror again, the man who reshapes the world according to his vision. But in sleep, he is simply a man who has found temporary refuge in my arms and in my kingdom. The incense grows thicker, creating veils of sacred smoke that transform my chambers into a temple of memory. I see myself at 25, pacing these same floors while messengers bring word of Caesar's assassination. The knife wounds that killed him might as well have been carved into my own flesh, for I feel every one of them as I realize that my protector, my lover, my partner in remaking the ancient world, has fallen to Roman jealousy and ambition. The tears I shed that day are salt that the incense cannot purify, salt that stains my cheeks even now as I remember the sound of my own voice crying his name into the empty air. But hearts, like kingdoms, must adapt or perish. The smoke shifts, and I see myself at 30, preparing to meet Marcus Antonius for the first time. I spend hours selecting every detail of my appearance, every jewel and silk and perfume, understanding that this meeting will determine whether Egypt remains free or becomes merely another Roman province. The golden barge that carries me to him is a stage, and I am both actress and queen, playing the role of Aphrodite while calculating the political mathematics that might save my people. Antonius proves to be a different kind of challenge than Caesar. Where Caesar was controlled passion, sharp intelligence wrapped in military discipline, Marcus is pure fire. A man whose emotions burn as bright and dangerous as the sun itself. He falls in love with my performance, then with the woman beneath the performance, and finally with something deeper than either, the dream of an empire that bridges east and west, that unites the ancient wisdom of Egypt with the young strength of Rome. The incense curls around my wrists like invisible shackles, reminding me of golden chains that were gifts and bonds that were promises. I remember nights when Marcus and I planned our future empire, mapping territories on silk sheets while our bodies mapped each other's territories with equal precision. We spoke of our children ruling a world that would know no boundaries between Roman eagles and Egyptian falcons, where the Tiber and the Nile would flow together in eternal union. Yet even in the height of passion, even when our love seemed strong enough to reshape geography itself, I felt the weight of inevitable tragedy. The incense carries premonitions as well as memory, and I smell in its sacred smoke the bitter herbs of endings, the myrrh that is burned for the dead. Love, I have learned, is archaeology. We dig through layers of desire and discovery, uncovering artifacts of intimacy that reveal how civilizations of the heart rise and fall according to laws more ancient than dynasties. The smoke begins to thin as the incense burns low in its golden holders. Soon these chambers will return to ordinary darkness, and I will sleep alone as queens must always sleep, surrounded by silk and gold, but untouched by the simple comfort of a hand that seeks nothing but the warmth of contact. But tonight, these memories live in the air around me, and I breathe them like prayers to gods who understand that even pharaohs must sometimes kneel before the mysteries of mortal longing. This throne has known the weight of my body for 18 years, yet tonight it feels foreign beneath me, as if the gold has grown cold with accumulated secrets, and the ivory armrests have developed ears that listen too carefully to the confessions of queens. I shift against the familiar cushions, silk dyed with saffron and bordered with pearls that once adorned the necks of conquered rivals, and I wonder when the seat of power became the seat of profound solitude. The throne room stretches before me in magnificent emptiness, lit only by torches that cast dancing shadows on walls decorated with scenes of pharaonic triumph. Here, painted gods bestow divine authority on royal figures. There, defeated enemies kneeled in eternal submission before the might of Egypt. But the painted victories feel hollow tonight, mere decoration surrounding the living reality of a woman who has learned that every crown is also a cage, every symbol of divine authority also a reminder of mortal limitations. My fingers trace the hieroglyphs carved into the throne's arms, each symbol a prayer and a proclamation. Life, prosperity, health, the ancient formula declares, but I have discovered that true prosperity cannot be measured in gold mines or tribute from vassal states, and health of the body means nothing when the heart carries wounds that no physician can heal. The carved ankh beneath my palm promises eternal life, yet I feel the weight of finite years pressing against my consciousness like sand filling an hourglass. The crown of Upper and Lower Egypt rests on a pedestal beside me, its cobra and vulture symbols gleaming in the torchlight. The Uraeus serpent, protector of pharaohs, seems to watch me with ancient wisdom, while the vulture's wings spread wide as if preparing to carry away the soul of a dying dynasty. I have worn this crown in triumph and in desperation, in moments of absolute certainty and in hours when I questioned every decision that brought me to this golden seat. Power, I reflect, is the most seductive of all deceptions. When I first claimed this throne, barely 18 years old and burning with the righteousness of destiny, I believed that royal authority would translate into actual control over my fate. I imagined that commanding armies meant commanding outcomes, that the ability to decree life and death for my subjects would protect me from the mathematics of heartbreak and political necessity that govern the lives of queens as surely as they govern the lives of commoners. The marble floor beneath my throne is inlaid with a map of Egypt, lapis lazuli forming the Nile, gold marking the major cities, precious stones representing the temples and monuments that proclaim our civilization to the ages. I can see my entire kingdom from this elevated seat, but I cannot see the future that rushes toward us like floodwaters, cannot predict whether the next dawn will bring Roman ships to Alexandria's harbor, or whether my children will inherit anything more substantial than the memory of a mother who loved unwisely and ruled with a heart that refused to calculate the cost of its affections. The torch flames flicker, creating the illusion of movement in the painted figures that surround me. For a moment, the pharaohs of the past seem to step forward from their eternal poses, and I hear their whispered warnings. "The throne demands everything," they murmur. "Your youth, your innocence, your capacity for simple joy. It gives you the world in exchange for your soul. And only after the bargain is complete do you realize that the world is not worth possessing if you possess it alone." My memory carries me to the morning I learned of Caesar's death. I sat in this same throne, wearing ceremonial robes that suddenly felt like burial shrouds, listening to a messenger describe how the great Roman fell beneath senatorial daggers. The power that flowed through my golden seat could not resurrect the dead or undo the political catastrophe that his assassination represented. All my divine authority, all my pharaonic majesty proved insufficient to protect the man whose alliance had guaranteed Egypt's independence. That day, I understood for the first time that the throne is a stage, not a sanctuary. Everything I do here is performance, calculated gesture designed to inspire confidence in subjects who need to believe their queen is more than human. The crown transforms me into a symbol, and symbols cannot afford the luxury of genuine emotion or spontaneous response. Even my grief must be politically useful. Even my love must serve the interests of state. Yet tonight, alone with shadows and silence, I allow myself the dangerous indulgence of remembering what it felt like to be simply Cleopatra, not Cleopatra VII, Philopator, pharaoh of Upper and Lower Egypt, queen of queens. I remember the girl who once sat on this throne and believed that love and power could coexist, that a woman could rule nations and still surrender her heart without surrendering her kingdom. The golden armrests are warm beneath my palms now, heated by my own body, and I feel the pulse of my blood against the metal. This throne has absorbed the life force of every pharaoh who sat here before me, and tonight it absorbs mine as well, adding my essence to the accumulated weight of royal history. When I am gone, when this seat knows another occupant, or when Egypt itself falls to foreign conquest, something of my struggle will remain in the gold. My questions will echo in the carved hieroglyphs. The power I wield from this throne extends across 3 continents. Yet it cannot answer the simplest questions that haunt the darkness of sleepless nights. Can a queen love without condition? Can a pharaoh trust without calculation? Can a woman who must be goddess to her people remain human enough to give and receive the simple affection that makes existence bearable? The throne rises above the floor like an island above floodwaters, and I am its sole inhabitant, marooned in majesty, rescued and abandoned by the same golden seat that elevates me above mortality while chaining me to responsibilities that no mortal frame was designed to bear. Tonight I sit here not as Egypt's divine ruler, but as Egypt's eternal prisoner, bound to this chair by duty and desire, by love of country and fear of failure, by the knowledge that stepping down means surrendering not just power, but identity itself. In the space between waking and sleep, Caesar returns to me with the inevitability of flooding Nile waters, his presence filling my chamber like incense that has learned to take human form. I lie still against silk pillows, afraid that movement will break the spell that brings him back from the realm of the dead, afraid that breathing too deeply will dispel the phantom warmth that seems to emanate from his ghostly form. His eyes hold the same calculating intelligence that first captivated me in Rome, but now they carry the wisdom that comes only to those who have crossed the threshold between life and death. When he speaks, his voice carries echoes of the underworld, yet it retains the authority that once commanded legions and reshaped the boundaries of the known world. Cleopatra, he whispers, and my name on his lips sounds like both benediction and warning. I reach toward him, my hand moving through moonlight that streams through windows overlooking the harbor. The silver light transforms the familiar contours of my chamber into something ethereal, a space where the living and the dead might meet to finish conversations that political assassination left incomplete. My fingers encounter nothing but air where his face should be, yet I feel the memory of his skin beneath my palm, the rough texture of a soldier's hands that could be surprisingly gentle when they traced the geography of a queen's body. Why do you return to me, I ask the shadows, though I know the answer lives in my own heart rather than in any ghostly visitation. Caesar returns because I have never allowed him to leave, because somewhere in the depths of my consciousness his death remains unacceptable, a wound that refuses to heal despite the passage of years and the consolation of other loves. He returns because I need to believe that what we shared transcended the political convenience that brought us together. The phantom Caesar moves through my chamber with the easy confidence he displayed in life, examining the Egyptian artifacts that fascinated him during his stays in Alexandria. He pauses before a statue of Isis, goddess of magic and motherhood, and I remember how he studied such pieces with the intensity of a scholar as well as the acquisitiveness of a conqueror. You taught me to see beauty as power, he murmurs, to understand that Egypt's true strength lay not in armies, but in the civilization that created such wonders. Memory bleeds into vision as I recall our first night together in this very room. Caesar had arrived in Alexandria pursuing his rival Pompey, but he found instead a queen who understood that survival sometimes requires calculated seduction. I had myself delivered to him wrapped in precious carpets, a theatrical gesture designed to demonstrate both vulnerability and audacity. When the carpets unfurled and I stepped naked before him, wearing only gold jewelry and the confidence of pharaonic blood, I saw in his eyes the moment when political calculation transformed into genuine desire. You played the goddess Aphrodite, the dream Caesar observes, but you were something more dangerous, a mortal woman who actually possessed the power to grant what gods could only promise. His form shimmers in the moonlight, sometimes solid enough to cast shadows, sometimes transparent as morning mist. Rome needed Egypt's grain and gold, but I needed the woman who could make me believe that even generals grown old in conquest could still be surprised by beauty and intelligence combined. I rise from my bed and move to the balcony, where the Nile reflects constellations that have guided travelers since the time of the first pharaohs. Caesar's spirit follows, and together we stand where we once planned the future of the world. Below us, Alexandria sleeps, but in the harbor I can see the ghostly outline of Roman triremes, ships that brought him to my shores, and ships that carried away his body after assassins' daggers found their mark in the forum. I gave you Celeorion, I whisper to the night air, speaking of our son, whose very existence challenged Rome's understanding of legitimate succession. I gave you an heir who carried both Roman ambition and Egyptian divine blood. Did you ever hold him and wonder what kind of world such a child might create? The phantom responds with silence more eloquent than words, but I feel the weight of his unspoken answer. Caesar loved our son as he loved all his children, as chess pieces in a game that extended beyond individual lifetimes, as investments in a future that might vindicate the violence and ambition that marked his rise to power. Yes, I also sense, in the way his ghostly form turns toward the part of the palace where Celeorion sleeps, a father's genuine pride, mixed with the politician's calculation.
Your death broke something in me. I confess to the shadows that might be Caesar or might be my own desperate need for closure. Not just political protection, though Egypt needed that. You broke my faith in the possibility that love might survive the mathematics of empire building. After they killed you, I could never again believe that what happened between a man and a woman in private chambers could remain separate from the larger forces that move nations like game pieces across the board of history. The dream Caesar reaches toward me, his hand almost solid enough to touch, and I feel the phantom sensation of fingers against my cheek. You were never naive enough to believe in pure love, he says, his voice carrying both admiration and regret. From our first meeting, you understood that queens must love strategically, that every kiss is also a treaty, every caress also a negotiation. What broke in you was not innocence, but the hope that strategy and genuine feeling might coexist without destroying each other. The harbor breeze carries the scent of sea salt mixed with lotus blossoms, and I breathe deeply, trying to anchor myself in sensory reality, even as my consciousness drifts between memory and vision. When I was young, I believed that great love stories were about transcending practical concerns, about passion so powerful it could reshape the world according to its desires. Now I understand that the greatest love stories are about accepting the limitations that the world imposes on even the most transcendent feelings. Would you change anything? I ask the phantom, though I fear his answer almost as much as I need to hear it. Would you choose differently if you could live those years again? Caesar's ghost smiles with the enigmatic expression that once frustrated Roman senators and charmed Egyptian queens. I would change everything and nothing, he replies. The heart makes its choices according to logic that the mind spends lifetimes trying to understand. We loved as gods and died as mortals, and perhaps that is the only honest way for rulers to live. As dawn approaches, his form begins to fade like incense smoke dispersing in morning air. Soon I will wake alone, and the rational part of my mind will dismiss this encounter as the product of grief and sleeplessness. But something essential will remain, the knowledge that love, even politically motivated love, even love interrupted by assassination, creates connections that death cannot entirely sever. The small vial rests in my palm like a teardrop crystallized into glass, its surface warm from the heat of my skin, its contents dark as the sacred waters of the underworld. Tonight, this tiny vessel contains not just poison, but possibility, the ultimate freedom that no empire can grant and no conqueror can deny.
I roll it between my fingers, feeling the weight of final choices, the gravity of decisions that transform queens into legends and mortals into myths. The poison was prepared by my personal physician according to formulas guarded in the temple of Serapis, recipes that promise swift passage from the land of the living to whatever realm awaits those who choose their own moment of departure. The liquid inside gleams like liquid obsidian when I hold it up to catch the light of oil lamps that burn throughout my private chambers. Each flame creates a different pattern of reflection on the glass, and I find myself mesmerized by the way light can transform even death into something beautiful. My rose garden spreads beneath the windows of my chambers, each bloom carefully tended by gardeners who understand that beauty requires constant attention, constant protection from the forces of decay that claim all living things. The roses release their fragrance into the night air, petals that will fall and return to earth within days. Their brief moment of perfection, a reminder that everything exquisite carries within it the seeds of its own dissolution. I set the vial on a table inlaid with ivory and ebony, beside a scroll that contains the final poem I will never finish writing. Words that attempt to capture the experience of ruling an empire while learning to love mortal men who wanted to possess both my kingdom and my heart. The ink has dried into permanence, but the thoughts remain fluid, shifting like desert sands that reshape themselves according to winds that blow from directions no human wisdom can predict. Death has been my constant companion since childhood, not as enemy but as counselor, the one advisor who never lies about the ultimate consequences of royal decisions. When I was still a girl learning statecraft, my tutors taught me that pharaohs must think beyond their own lifetimes, must make choices that serve dynasties rather than individuals. But they never explained how exhausting it becomes to live always for the future, never for the immediate pleasure of sunlight on skin or the simple satisfaction of laughter shared without calculation. The roses outside my window bloom and fade according to seasons that care nothing for political boundaries or military campaigns. Tonight, as I contemplate the contents of this small vial, I envy their innocent relationship with mortality. A rose blooms because blooming is its nature, dies because dying is its destiny, feels no conflict between beauty and briefness, no tension between fulfilling its purpose and accepting its limitations. My memories drift to a morning 3 months past, when news arrived that Octavian's forces had defeated Marcus Antonius at Actium. I stood in my throne room, still wearing ceremonial robes from dawn rituals, listening to a messenger describe how Roman ships had surrounded and destroyed the fleet that represented our last hope for military victory. The words entered my ears like arrows, each detail a small death that accumulated into the larger death of dreams I had carried for 20 years. That day, I first touched the poison vial, first allowed my fingers to trace its smooth surface while calculating what defeat might mean for Egypt, for my children, for the dynasty that had ruled here since Alexander's general Ptolemy first claimed this land as his inheritance. The vial offered answer to questions that no amount of diplomatic skill could resolve, solution to problems that existed beyond the reach of negotiation or compromise. Yet I did not drink that day, nor have I drunk on any of the nights since, though the vial has remained close enough to touch, constant reminder that some freedoms can only be claimed by those willing to pay their ultimate price. Instead, I have used these months to study the mathematics of ending, to explore the geography of conclusion, to understand how legends are born from the bodies of queens who choose their own terms of departure. The roses nod in the night breeze, their movements like the gestures of courtiers acknowledging the inevitable wisdom of their sovereign's decision. I imagine them as witnesses to this moment of royal contemplation, silent observers who understand that even pharaohs must sometimes weigh the relative merits of surrender and defiance, of survival and dignity, of living as prisoner or dying as queen. My physician explained that the poison works swiftly, that consciousness fades like music growing distant, that the body simply releases its grip on life without struggle or pain.
Like falling asleep while listening to temple bells, he promised, his voice carrying the professional detachment that allows healers to discuss death without being paralyzed by its implications. Yet I wonder if he truly understands what he offers, if anyone who has never worn a crown can comprehend the particular weight that settles on royal shoulders when they contemplate laying that crown aside forever. The vial catches light from a passing cloud that briefly covers the moon, and for a moment the poison inside seems to glow with its own luminescence, as if the liquid contained not death, but transformation, not ending, but transition to something beyond the reach of Roman ambition or personal heartbreak. I think of the pharaohs who came before me, rulers who faced their own impossible choices, who found in death the final assertion of royal prerogative. Tonight, the poison remains untouched, while I breathe the perfume of roses that will outlive empires, while I trace with my eyes the familiar patterns of stars that have watched the rise and fall of dynasties beyond counting. Tomorrow may bring different choices, different calculations, different understanding of what honor demands from queens who have loved unwisely, but ruled with passionate commitment to something larger than their own survival. The vial sits in patient silence, offering its dark promise to a woman who has learned that the most powerful position in the world still leaves one powerless to prevent heartbreak, still leaves one calculating the price of dignity against the cost of surrender. Tonight, surrounded by roses and starlight, I hold death in my palm and consider what it might mean to choose the moment of my own conclusion. The Mediterranean stretches endlessly beyond Alexandria's harbor, its waters holding both memory and promise, carrying ships that brought Marcus Antonius to my shores, and ships that now sail away bearing news of our defeat to Roman ears that will celebrate the fall of Egypt's last pharaoh. I stand at my palace window, watching the waves that move according to lunar rhythms older than dynasties, waves that care nothing for the human dramas played out on the shores they eternally caress and abandon. Marcus, my beautiful Marcus, exists now only in the spaces between heartbeats, in the pause between breathing in and breathing out, in the silence that follows thunder when the storm has moved beyond the horizon, but its echo still reverberates in bones and blood. 3 days have passed since messengers brought word of his death. 3 days during which I have discovered that grief has its own geography, its own territories of desolation that no map can chart, no army can conquer.
My hands rest against the window's marble frame, and I feel through the stone the vibration of waves against the palace foundations, the eternal rhythm that connects my sorrow to something larger than personal loss. The sea holds traces of every vessel that has ever crossed its surface, just as my heart holds traces of every man who has ever claimed temporary residence in its chambers. Yet Marcus was different, not just lover or political ally, but the completion of some equation I had been solving since childhood without knowing the nature of the problem. The memory rises unbidden, as memories of the dead always do, asserting themselves with authority that the living cannot match. I am 32 years old, standing on the golden barge that will carry me to my first meeting with Marcus Antonius, wearing silk that catches sunlight and jewelry that catches admiration, every detail calculated to represent Egypt's magnificence while concealing my desperate need for Roman protection. The barge itself is theater, designed to make me appear as Aphrodite rising from Mediterranean foam, goddess of love meeting god of war in a performance that might save my kingdom. But when I see Marcus waiting on the shore, when his eyes meet mine across water that suddenly seems insignificant as distance, I understand that something beyond political necessity has brought us to this moment. He is 42 years old, scarred by campaigns that stretched from Gaul to Syria. Yet his smile carries the boyish enthusiasm that made him beloved by soldiers who would follow him into any battle, any impossible dream of conquest and glory. That first night together, in a tent erected on the shores of the Cydnus River, we speak as much as we touch, planning empires while discovering each other's bodies, mapping territories both geographical and emotional with equal passion and precision. Marcus traces the golden serpent bracelet that circles my upper arm and asks about its significance. It represents the cobra goddess, I explain, protector of pharaohs, symbol of divine authority. His finger follows the serpent's curves while his eyes hold mine. Then I am touching divinity, he whispers, but his tone suggests he sees not goddess, but woman, not symbol, but flesh that responds to his touch with entirely mortal hunger. The window glass grows cool against my forehead as I lean forward, trying to glimpse ships that exist now only in memory. Vessels that carried Marcus and me across the Mediterranean on journeys that combine state business with personal pleasure. We sailed from Alexandria to Athens, from Athens to Ephesus, from Ephesus to Tarsus. Each destination an excuse to delay the political responsibilities that waited in Rome. Each harbor a stage for the performance of perfect love that we enacted for ourselves as much as for the audiences who gathered to witness the romance between Egypt's queen and Rome's triumvir. Our love was public in ways that royal affection rarely permits. Marcus delighted in displaying his Egyptian queen, in showing Rome that he had captured not just political alliance, but the heart of a woman who could have chosen any man in the known world. We held banquets that lasted for days, celebrations where Roman efficiency merged with Egyptian luxury to create something entirely new, a hybrid culture that might have flourished if the world had been large enough to contain our dreams. I remember the night we danced together in Ephesus, our bodies moving to music that blended Egyptian harps with Roman horns, our steps tracing patterns that seemed to predict the geography of the empire we planned to build together. Marcus lifted me above his head, and for a moment I felt weightless, freed from the gravity of political necessity, spinning in space where queens could be simply women, and triumvirs could be simply men, discovering that love might be the only conquest worth celebrating. But gravity always reclaims those who dare to fly, and our empire of dreams collapsed under the weight of Roman ambition that could not tolerate division of power, could not accept that Marcus Antonius might choose Egyptian goddess over Roman glory. Octavian's propaganda painted our love as corruption, portrayed Marcus as a Roman hero enslaved by foreign seduction, transformed our passion into political weakness that threatened the stability of the Republic. The final battle came at Actium, where our combined fleets met Octavian's navy in waters that had witnessed naval conflicts since Greek triremes first challenged Persian ships for control of Mediterranean trade routes. I sailed beside Marcus into that battle, 60 Egyptian vessels supporting his Roman galleys, our flags flying side by side as they had in so many previous victories.
But the gods who had smiled on our earlier campaigns withheld their favor, and by sunset our dreams lay broken on waters that turned red with the blood of sailors who died for love disguised as politics. Marcus escaped that disaster, sailed back to Alexandria with the remnants of our fleet, but something essential died in him during those hours of defeat. The man who returned to my palace carried victory's ghost in his eyes, spoke of future campaigns with the hollow enthusiasm of someone reciting lines he no longer believes. I held him through nights when he woke screaming the names of ships that went down with all hands, when he reached for me in darkness as if my touch could somehow resurrect the possibilities that sank beneath Actium's waves. The final separation came not through dramatic gesture, but through the quiet erosion that follows great disappointment. Marcus began spending days in the harbor, staring at waters that held the graves of our ambitions, speaking to phantom admirals who existed now only in memory. He would return to my chambers at sunset, make love to me with desperate intensity, then lie awake composing letters to soldiers who would never read them, planning victories that would never be won. When news came that Octavian's armies had landed in Egypt, Marcus rallied briefly to the possibility of final resistance. We spent 3 days preparing Alexandria's defenses, reviewing plans for siege warfare, calculating how long our supplies might last against Roman determination. But I saw in his face the acceptance that had been growing since Actium, the understanding that some defeats are too complete to survive, some losses too fundamental to overcome. The last time I saw him alive, he was standing in this same window where I stand now, watching Roman ships mass in the harbor that had once welcomed him as conqueror and lover. He turned to me with a smile that contained all our shared history, the passion and the politics, the dreams and the disappointments, the moments when we were gods and the hours when we were merely mortals who had loved beyond the boundaries that the world imposes on human hearts. "Egypt will survive," he said, his voice carrying certainty that surprised us both. "You will find ways to preserve what matters, to protect the children, to ensure that something of our vision lives beyond our bodies." He touched my face with the gentleness that had first convinced me that Roman hands could learn Egyptian tenderness. But our time together ends now, before external forces can transform love into political liability. The sea breeze carries salt that tastes like tears, like the bitter flavor of dreams that dissolved in Mediterranean waters.
like the essence of a love that was too large for the world that contained it. Tonight, as I stand where Marcus stood during his final hours in Alexandria, I feel his presence in the rhythm of waves against stone, in the whisper of wind through palace corridors, in the weight of solitude that settles on shoulders once warmed by a lover's arms. Tomorrow, Octavian's representatives will demand my surrender, will offer terms that might preserve my children's lives at the cost of everything that made their mother a queen worth remembering. But tonight belongs to memory, to the ghost of Marcus Antonius who sails forever on Mediterranean waters that connect past to future, love to loss, the woman who was Cleopatra to the pharaoh who must soon decide how legends are born from the ashes of defeated dreams. The children sleep in chambers that connect to mine, through corridors lined with painted scenes of maternal goddesses protecting their divine offspring. But tonight, even Isis herself seems powerless to shield young hearts from the inheritance of sorrow that flows through royal bloodlines like the Nile flows through Egypt. Inevitable, life-giving, and sometimes destructive in its abundance. I move through their rooms like a spirit haunting her own future, my bare feet silent against marble floors that will soon echo with the footsteps of Roman guards, my silk chiton rustling with the whisper of a mother's desperate love trying to transform itself into protection that no earthly power can guarantee. Caesarion lies curled in sleep that grants him temporary refuge from the knowledge that his father's death marked him for execution, that Octavian will never allow Caesar's Egyptian son to reach manhood and claim the inheritance that Rome fears more than any military threat. My fingers trace the golden amulet that rests against my 17-year-old son's throat, the protective charm inscribed with hieroglyphs that promise long life and divine favor. But what protection can ancient magic offer against political mathematics that demand the elimination of inconvenient heirs? Caesarion carries Caesar's nose and my own stubborn intelligence, a combination that makes him irresistible to those who dream of pharaohs who might unite East and West, and irresistible targets for those who profit from keeping Egypt and Rome forever separate. In the adjoining chamber, my twins with Marcus Antonius sleep with the abandon that belongs only to the truly innocent. Alexander Helios, named for the conqueror whose legacy shaped this world, breathes with the steady rhythm of a child who believes in tomorrow's possibilities. Cleopatra Selene, my daughter, who carries my name into a future I may never see, murmurs in her sleep words that might be prayers, or might be the beginning of dreams, where queens live happily and mothers never have to choose between love and survival. Little Ptolemy Philadelphus, barely 6 years old, sleeps with his thumb in his mouth, and his other hand clutching a wooden horse that Marcus carved for him during the long winter when Roman armies gathered like storm clouds on Egypt's borders. The horse's paint has worn away from constant handling, but the child clings to it with the fierce loyalty that all children reserve for treasures that adults cannot understand, cannot replace, cannot adequately protect from the forces that reshape the world without consulting the hearts of mothers or the needs of sons. Each child represents a different gamble I made with destiny, a different calculation of love against political necessity, a different dream of what might be possible when passion creates life that transcends the boundaries that separate empires. Caesarion was my attempt to bind Caesar to Egypt through bonds stronger than treaties, to give him an heir who would choose Alexandria over Rome when the time came for choosing. The twins were my gift to Marcus and to the future, children who might grow up to rule the hybrid empire we planned to build together, citizens of a world where Roman eagles and Egyptian falcons might nest in the same trees. But children, I have learned, are not political instruments that bend to their parents' will. They are forces of nature, like floods or storms, carrying within them possibilities that no amount of maternal planning can predict or control. Caesarion questions everything with the intensity that his father brought to military campaigns, demanding explanations for customs and decisions that I learned to accept without analysis. The twins display personalities as different as sun and moon. Alexander Helios, burning with ambition that frightens me with its early manifestation. Cleopatra Selene, watching the world with eyes that see too much, understand too deeply the undercurrents of adult emotion that children should be protected from discovering. Young Ptolemy remains blessedly unaware of the currents that swirl around his small life, content with wooden toys and the simple certainties that make childhood a paradise that adults spend lifetimes trying to recapture. When he looks at me, he sees only mother, not pharaoh, not political strategist, not woman torn between competing loyalties and impossible choices. His love is pure mathematics, complete, unconditional, demanding nothing but presence and the security that comes from knowing someone exists whose primary purpose is ensuring his happiness and safety. Tonight, as I watch over their sleep, I feel the weight of maternal mathematics that no crown can lighten, no royal authority can simplify. How do I protect children whose very existence challenges Roman supremacy? How do I prepare them for a world that may have no place for Egyptian royalty, no tolerance for the hybrid dreams that created them? What legacy can a defeated queen leave to children who may grow up as prisoners, as curiosities in Roman triumphal parades, as reminders of their mother's love for men who chose Egypt over Roman duty? My hand hovers over Caesarion's sleeping form, and I remember the night he was born, how Caesar's face transformed when he held his son for the first time. The great general who had conquered Gaul and crossed the Rubicon wept like any common father when tiny fingers grasped his thumb, when dark eyes opened and seemed to recognize something familiar in his face. "He will be greater than both of us," Caesar whispered, his voice thick with the wonder that reduces even emperors to speechless gratitude for the miracle of new life. But greatness, I understand now, is burden as much as blessing, target as much as crown. My children carry in their veins the accumulated ambitions and disappointments of dynasties, the hopes and fears of parents who loved across political boundaries, who created life while building empires that collapsed beneath the weight of their own contradictions. Each heartbeat, each breath, each moment of innocent sleep carries forward something precious and something dangerous. Something that must be preserved, and something that may need to be surrendered to ensure survival. The oil lamps burn low in their holders, casting dancing shadows that transform the children's chambers into theaters where past and future perform their eternal drama. I see myself as a child in similar rooms, protected by similar maternal love, dreaming similar dreams of destiny and power, unaware that growing up means learning to carry other people's expectations along with your own desires, other people's fears along with your own courage. Tomorrow will bring decisions that no mother should be forced to make, choices that exist beyond the reach of wisdom or precedent. But tonight I breathe the scent of sleeping children, the perfume of innocence that no incense can replicate, the fragrance of love that exists independent of politics or strategy or the calculations that have shaped every other aspect of my adult life. Tonight I am not Cleopatra the Seventh, Pharaoh of Upper and Lower Egypt, but simply mother to children who trust that tomorrow will provide the same security as yesterday, who sleep in the faith that maternal love creates shields strong enough to turn away any threat that might challenge their right to dream of futures that extend beyond the reach of Roman ambition.
The sacred serpents move through their golden enclosure with liquid grace, their scales catching lamplight like living jewels, their eyes holding wisdom that predates human civilization, that remembers the time before pharaohs, when Egypt belonged to gods who wore reptilian forms and spoke in languages that human throats could never pronounce. Tonight, these creatures of ancient power seem restless, coiling and uncoiling, with movements that suggest they sense changes in the cosmic order, shifts in the balance between life and death that only creatures born from primordial chaos can detect. I kneel beside their sanctuary, a chamber within my private apartments where the cobras, sacred to Wadjet, protector goddess of Lower Egypt, live in luxury that rivals my own. The golden mesh that contains them is fine enough to allow air and light to pass freely, strong enough to protect visitors from fangs that carry death, dissolved in venom more precious than liquid diamonds. Yet tonight, I wonder who truly needs protection, the serpents from human interference, or the humans from serpent wisdom that sees too clearly the mathematics of endings. The largest cobra raises her head as I approach, her hood spreading in a display that might be threat or greeting, her tongue flicking out to taste the air around my face. Ancient texts claim that such serpents can smell fear and courage with equal precision, can detect the presence of divine blood that flows through pharaonic veins, can recognize those mortals who have been chosen by gods for purposes that transcend ordinary human understanding. Her golden eyes reflect the oil flames, creating the illusion of inner fire, of consciousness that burns with authority older than dynasties. My physician keeps the antidotes in a locked chest beside my bed, compounds extracted from the same species that might kill me, healing drawn from the source of harm, according to principles that Egyptian medicine has refined over millennia. The largest cobra raises her head as I approach, her hood spreading in a display that might be threat or greeting, her tongue flicking out to taste the air around my face. Ancient texts claim that such serpents can smell fear and courage with equal precision, can detect the presence of divine blood that flows through pharaonic veins, can recognize those mortals who have been chosen by gods for purposes that transcend ordinary human understanding. Her golden eyes reflect the oil flames, creating the illusion of inner fire, of consciousness that burns with authority older than dynasties. My physician keeps the antidotes in a locked chest beside my bed, compounds extracted from the same species that might kill me, healing drawn from the source of harm, according to principles that Egyptian medicine has refined over millennia.
But tonight, I wonder if wisdom might lie in refusing antidotes, in accepting that some truths can only be learned by those willing to surrender the illusion of safety, to embrace the transformations that come when mortal flesh yields to immortal venom. The serpents move in patterns that suggest choreography, ancient dance steps that predate human music, movements that might be ritual or might be preparation for mysteries that require reptilian understanding. I watch their fluid navigation of space and remember childhood lessons about Maat, the divine order that maintains balance between creation and destruction, life and death, the forces that build civilizations and the forces that return them to the sand from which they arose. "What do you see?" I whisper to the cobra, whose attention seems focused on something beyond the walls of her enclosure, beyond the boundaries of my chambers, beyond the horizon where Roman ships gather like vultures around a dying empire. Her stillness suggests listening to voices that human ears cannot detect, instructions delivered in frequencies that bypass conscious thought to communicate directly with the part of the soul that remembers its reptilian origins. The Temple of Wadjet in the Delta preserves records of pharaohs who consulted serpent oracles before making decisions that would reshape the known world. Rulers who understood that human wisdom has limitations that reptilian instinct can transcend. The priests taught me that cobras dream of the future while they sleep, that their visions penetrate veils that hide tomorrow from mortal sight, that their bite can grant prophetic understanding to those brave enough to risk death for glimpses of what lies beyond the present moment's narrow confines. Memory carries me to the ceremony of my coronation 18 years ago, when the high priest of Pa placed the uraeus crown upon my head, the cobra symbol that transforms mortal women into living goddesses.
I felt the metal serpent against my forehead like a third eye opening, like consciousness expanding to encompass not just personal awareness, but the accumulated wisdom of every pharaoh who had worn similar crowns, who had accepted similar responsibilities, who had learned to see the world through serpent eyes that register heat and movement with supernatural precision. The cobras in their golden sanctuary seemed to respond to my memories, their movements becoming more deliberate, more ceremonial, as if they recognize in my presence an echo of that coronation day when human and serpent consciousness merged in the ancient ritual that creates pharaohs from ordinary mortals. The largest female approaches the mesh that separates us, her body undulating with the hypnotic rhythm that has fascinated humans since Eden, since the first conversations between serpent wisdom and human curiosity produced knowledge too dangerous for innocent minds to contain. "Do you remember the taste of divine blood?" I ask her, thinking of the legends that describe how Cleopatra I allowed sacred cobras to bite her during the crisis that threatened Ptolemaic rule, how the venom granted her visions that revealed the political strategies needed to preserve Egyptian independence. The serpent's tongue flicks toward me, and I imagine it sampling the chemical signature of my emotions, analyzing the complex mixture of fear and fascination that draws me to this chamber night after night. The oil lamps create shifting patterns of light and shadow that transform the serpents into mythical creatures, beings that might have emerged from the primordial waters of Nun to teach the first pharaohs the secrets of ruling mortals while remaining accountable to gods. Their scales shimmer with colors that exist nowhere else in nature. Gold that shines like sunlight on Nile water, black that absorbs light like the void between stars, patterns that suggest hieroglyphic messages written in a language that predates human writing.
I extend my hand toward the mesh, not quite touching the metal barrier, but close enough to feel the heat that radiates from reptilian bodies, warmth that speaks of blood that flows according to rhythms different from human circulation, consciousness that operates according to logic that human minds can glimpse but never fully comprehend. The cobra's head follows my movement with mechanical precision, her eyes tracking my fingers with interest that might be predatory or might be recognition of kinship between creatures who serve powers larger than themselves. Tonight, the serpent seemed to whisper prophecies in languages that bypass my ears to communicate directly with the part of my consciousness that existed before birth, that will exist after death, that recognizes truth independent of hope or fear. They speak of transformations that await those brave enough to choose their own moment of metamorphosis, of freedoms that can only be claimed by those willing to pay death's ultimate price, of wisdom that blooms like lotus flowers from the fertile soil of mortal endings. The largest cobra coils into a perfect spiral, her body creating geometric patterns that might be sacred symbols, might be invitations, might be warnings, about futures that approach with the inevitability of sunrise, with the certainty of Nile floods, with the mathematical precision that governs the movement of stars across the dome of night. In her golden eyes I see reflections of the woman I was, the queen I became, and the legend I might choose to become if courage proves stronger than the survival instinct that keeps ordinary mortals anchored to life, regardless of the cost to dignity or purpose.
Alexandria sleeps fitfully beneath my palace windows, the greatest city in the world, tossing in dreams that carry the weight of approaching change, the scent of fear that drifts through streets where Greek philosophy once debated Roman engineering, where Egyptian wisdom once merged with Mediterranean commerce to create something unprecedented in human history. From my elevated chambers, I watch over a metropolis that has been my kingdom's crown jewel and my heart's deepest love. A city that will soon belong to conquerors who may never understand what they have inherited. The lighthouse beam sweeps across harbor waters with mechanical precision, its fire maintained by keepers who continue their duties even as Roman ships mass beyond the breakwater like hungry wolves surrounding a wounded deer. That beacon has guided vessels from every corner of the known world to Alexandria's ports, has welcomed ships bearing silk from distant China, spices from mysterious India, gold from Nubian mines, and scholars seeking the knowledge preserved in our great library. Tonight, its light seems dimmer, as if the flame itself recognizes that the age it has illuminated draws toward its inevitable conclusion. The great library rises in the distance, its columns visible in moonlight that transforms marble into silver, its walls containing the accumulated wisdom of human civilization, scrolls and codices that preserve everything from Aristotle's observations about natural philosophy to Euclid's mathematical proofs, from Sappho's poetry to Persian astronomical calculations that map the movements of celestial bodies with precision that allows priests to predict eclipses decades in advance. Roman soldiers may soon march through those sacred halls, and I wonder if they will recognize the treasure that surrounds them, or see only expensive kindling for their cook fires. My city breathes with rhythms that reflect the diversity of its population. Greek merchants who arrived with Alexander's armies and stayed to build trading empires, Jewish communities that have flourished here for 3 centuries,
Ethiopian scholars who study in the museum, Roman administrators who have learned to love Egyptian culture despite their empire's suspicion of foreign influences, and native Egyptians whose ancestors built the pyramids and whose children speak languages that blend hieroglyphic precision with Hellenic eloquence. In the harbor district, taverns that cater to sailors from every nation remain open despite the crisis that looms over the city. I imagine merchants and ship captains drinking wine from amphoras sealed with royal marks, sharing stories of distant ports while avoiding discussion of the political catastrophe that threatens to transform Alexandria from cosmopolitan capital into provincial Roman city. The wine they drink was pressed from grapes grown in vineyards that my family has owned for generations. Juice that carries the essence of Egyptian soil, the blessing of Nile floods, the sweetness of civilization's most refined pleasures. The Serapeum, temple complex dedicated to the god who unites Egyptian and Greek divine traditions, stands like a fortress of faith in the southern district, its walls thick enough to withstand siege, its inner sanctums containing rituals that bridge the gap between mortal understanding and immortal mystery. Priests there maintain eternal flames that have burned since the Ptolemaic dynasty first claimed divine sanction for Greek rule over Egyptian subjects. Tonight, I wonder if those flames will survive the transition to Roman administration, if new rulers will honor the traditions that have made Alexandria a beacon of religious tolerance in a world that increasingly demands conformity to imperial preferences. The museum, that legendary institution where the greatest minds of each generation gather to push the boundaries of human knowledge, occupies a complex of buildings near the Palace District. Within its walls, mathematicians work on problems that may not be solved for centuries. Physicians study the circulation of blood through bodies they dissect with royal permission. Astronomers chart the movements of planets that influence human destiny. And engineers design machines that might revolutionize warfare or navigation or the simple arts of daily life. Tomorrow, those scholars may wake to find their research interrupted by soldiers who view intellectual curiosity as potential threat to imperial stability. From my balcony, I can see the tombs of Alexander the Great, his golden sarcophagus resting in the mausoleum that has drawn pilgrims from every corner of the civilized world. The young Macedonian king who conquered the Persian Empire and changed the course of history lies in state that befits his accomplishments, surrounded by treasures that represent the wealth of continents. His presence sanctifies Alexandria, legitimizes Ptolemaic rule, reminds visitors that this city was born from the dreams of a man who believed that East and West might unite under enlightened leadership. The residential districts spread in all directions from the palace complex, houses built in architectural styles that reflect the cultural mixture that defines Alexandrian identity. Greek columns support Egyptian cornices. Roman engineering creates aqueducts that supply water to buildings decorated with hieroglyphic inscriptions. Courtyards designed according to Persian principles contain gardens planted with flowers native to Ethiopian highlands. My subjects have created a hybrid culture that demonstrates the possibilities that emerge when different traditions merge through mutual respect rather than military conquest. In the Jewish quarter, synagogues preserve traditions that predate the fall of Jerusalem. Communities that have found in Alexandria the religious freedom that allows ancient practices to evolve without losing essential character. Their scholars work alongside Greek philosophers in the library, contribute to medical research in the museum,
Participate in commercial enterprises that connect Egypt to trading networks that span from Britain to Ceylon. Tonight, they may pray for divine intervention that will preserve the tolerant environment that has allowed their culture to flourish in Egyptian soil. The craftsmen's workshops that line the commercial streets contain products that represent the pinnacle of ancient artistry. Jewelry that combines Egyptian goldworking techniques with Greek design principles. Textiles that weave together silk from China with cotton from India and linen from the Nile Delta. Perfumes that blend aromatic oils from Arabia with lotus essences from Egyptian marshes. Roman collectors have coveted Alexandrian luxury goods for generations, but possession without understanding may transform precious art into mere commodity. Alexandria's markets have always buzzed with languages from every corner of the world, but tonight the usual polyglot conversations seem subdued, as if the city's multilingual soul recognizes that the approaching change may impose linguistic uniformity where diversity once flourished. Latin may soon dominate public discourse, pushing Greek into academic isolation and Egyptian into the shadows where conquered languages retreat to survive occupation. My beloved city dreams restlessly, and I dream with it, sharing its fears about the future while cherishing memories of the cosmopolitan paradise that has defined Alexandrian identity for 3 centuries. Tomorrow may bring the end of an experiment in cultural synthesis that began when Alexander chose this site for a city that would bridge continents and unite civilizations.
Tonight, I watch over Alexandria's sleep like a mother standing vigil beside a child who faces surgery that may cure or kill, knowing that love alone cannot determine the outcome, but hoping that somehow the miracle that created this city might also preserve it. The golden tears fall with mathematical precision onto silk that absorbs them like desert sand absorbs the Nile's gift, each drop a liquid memory of moments when queens discovered that crowns cannot protect hearts from the fundamental loneliness that accompanies absolute power, cannot shield mortal flesh from the arithmetic of loss that governs even the most elevated lives. Tonight, I weep not from weakness, but from the terrible clarity that comes when illusions finally dissolve, when the last pretenses fall away like discarded veils, revealing truth that has waited patiently beneath layers of royal necessity and diplomatic fiction. My hands, adorned with rings that represent the tribute of nations, shake as they lift a goblet filled with wine from vineyards that my ancestors planted when Rome was still a collection of mud huts beside the Tiber River. The gold cup, warmed by my palms, carries the weight of centuries, its surface decorated with scenes of pharaonic triumph that mock the reality of defeat, its rim stained with the salt of tears that taste like the Mediterranean waters that have carried away my dreams of empire and left me marooned on the shores of final choices. The treasure chambers beneath my palace contain wealth that could purchase kingdoms, could fund armies, could bribe senators and finance revolutions. Yet all that accumulated gold cannot buy the simplicity of unguarded affection, cannot purchase the luxury of tears shed for purely personal reasons rather than political calculations. I have learned that the richest woman in the world can be emotionally impoverished, that the most powerful ruler can be helpless against the forces that determine whether hearts break in solitude or find comfort in genuine understanding.
Memory carries me to my childhood, to the moment when my father first explained the responsibilities that would accompany my inheritance. A pharaoh's tears belong to Egypt, he said, his weathered face serious with the weight of dynastic wisdom. When you weep for the kingdom. When you laugh for the people. When you love for the dynasty. Personal emotion becomes political statement when it flows through royal veins. Even then, barely 12 years old, I understood that he was teaching me the mathematics of sacrifice, the equations that transform children into symbols, mortals into myths. But tonight, these tears refuse political interpretation, resist transformation into state theater or dynastic drama. They flow from the private woman who exists beneath the public pharaoh, from the mother who fears for her children's futures, from the lover who has buried 2 great men and watched empires crumble like sand sculptures touched by rising tides. Gold cannot comfort such grief, cannot heal wounds that exist beyond the reach of earthly treasure. The jewels that cover my arms and throat, emeralds from Ethiopian mines, pearls from Red Sea depths, rubies that once adorned Persian queens, feel heavy tonight, weighted with the accumulated expectations of subjects who have looked to their pharaoh for solutions to problems that exist beyond human ability to resolve. Each gem represents a district that pays tribute, a population that depends on royal wisdom, a tradition that assumes divine blood carries supernatural capacity to transform disaster into triumph through pure force of will.
I rise from my throne and move to windows that overlook the harbor, where Roman ships wait with the patience of predators who know their prey has nowhere to flee. The torchlight from their vessels creates patterns on dark water that suggest Greek funeral pyres, Egyptian cremation ceremonies, the flames that consume flesh while supposedly liberating souls for journey to whatever realm awaits the honored dead. Those ships carry men who see Alexandria as prize to be claimed, rather than civilization to be preserved. Soldiers who may never understand that they prepare to destroy something irreplaceable in human history. My treasury contains crowns that have blessed the heads of 21 pharaohs before me, each diadem a masterpiece of goldsmith's art, each one carrying the accumulated authority of rulers who made Egypt the envy of the ancient world. The crown of Upper Egypt, with its vulture goddess spreading protective wings. The crown of Lower Egypt, with its cobra ready to strike any threat to royal authority. The double crown that unites both kingdoms, that proclaims pharaonic power over the entire length of the Nile, from Elephantine to the Mediterranean Delta. Tonight, those golden symbols feel like chains, beautiful constraints that have bound me to responsibilities larger than any individual capacity to bear. The incense that burns in golden censers throughout my chambers creates smoke that carries prayers to gods who seem increasingly distant, increasingly indifferent to human suffering, increasingly focused on cosmic dramas that dwarf the temporary concerns of mortal rulers facing the end of dynasties. The frankincense that once seemed to bridge the gap between earth and heaven now seems to dissipate into emptiness, offering no comfort to queens who discover that divine blood provides no immunity to heartbreak, no special protection from the forces that reduce empires to footnotes in history texts.
I open the chest that contains my most private treasures, not gold or jewels, but letters from Caesar written in his own hand, scrolls where Marcus described his dreams for our shared future, drawings that Caesarion made as a child, locks of hair cut from my twins when they took their first steps, pressed flowers from gardens where we walked together during the brief seasons when love seemed stronger than politics, when hope seemed more reliable than fear. These personal artifacts, worthless to any conqueror, but priceless to the woman who preserved them, represent the true wealth that accumulated during my reign, not the tribute of nations or the homage of ambassadors, but the simple evidence that beneath the crown and behind the titles, a human heart beat with genuine affection for mortals who could see past pharaonic magnificence, to recognize the woman who needed love as desperately as her kingdom needed grain from successful harvests. The golden tears continue their ancient mathematics, each drop a payment toward the debt that all mortals owe to the forces that create and destroy, that elevate and humble, that grant power and exact the price of its possession. Tomorrow will require different mathematics, will demand calculations about surrender and dignity, about survival and legend, about the ways that queens choose to be remembered when they can no longer choose to be present. But tonight, surrounded by gold that cannot purchase comfort and jewels that cannot illuminate the darkness gathering around Alexandria's future, I allow myself the costly luxury of grief that serves no political purpose, tears that acknowledge not just the loss of empire, but the simpler sorrow of a woman who loved mortal men in an immortal world that ultimately belongs to neither. The Nile's voice grows softer now, its eternal murmur becoming whisper, becoming sigh, becoming the barely audible breath that connects this moment to all the moments that have flowed before, and all the silence that waits beyond the final heartbeat. I stand at the water's edge in my private garden, my feet bare against stones worn smooth by countless tides, my silk chiton moving like liquid shadow in the pre-dawn breeze that carries the scent of lotus blossoms and the distant promise of sunrise that I may never see. The sacred river reflects stars that have watched pharaohs rise and fall like flowers blooming and fading in gardens that exist for single seasons before returning to earth that remembers everything and mourns nothing. Tonight, those celestial lights seem closer than usual, as if the boundary between heaven and earth has grown thin, as if the gods prepare to reclaim a daughter who has worn mortality like expensive clothing that no longer fits properly, that constrains movement, that limits the soul's expansion into realms where queens transform into legends. My hands cup water that feels warm against my palms, liquid that has traveled from Ethiopian highlands through Nubian deserts to reach this garden where Egypt's last pharaoh kneels beside the source of all life, all civilization, all dreams that have shaped the Nile Valley since the first humans recognized that following this river north would lead them to abundance beyond imagination. The water slips through my fingers like time itself, like the years that have flowed past since I first learned to balance crown and heart, duty and desire. The garden around me holds flowers from every corner of the world, roses from Damascus, jasmine from India, poppies from fields where Alexander's soldiers once marched toward destiny. Lotus blossoms that have decorated Egyptian temples since pyramids first pierced the desert horizon. Each bloom represents a different hope I carried, a different dream I nurtured, a different possibility that seemed achievable when love provided energy for transforming the world according to vision rather than accepting it according to limitation. A ibis wades in the shallows, its white plumage ghostly in starlight, its presence both blessing and warning from Thoth, god of wisdom, who records the deeds of mortals in books that survive the collapse of civilizations.
The sacred bird pauses in its fishing to regard me with eyes that reflect ancient knowledge, that have seen this scene repeated throughout history. Rulers at the end of reigns, standing beside waters that will outlive empires, choosing how their stories will conclude. The current carries fragments of lotus petals past my feet, flowers that bloomed in upstream temples where priests perform dawn rituals that assume eternal continuity, ceremonies that preserve traditions older than Greek philosophy or Roman law. Those priests will wake to news of my death, will add my name to lists of pharaohs who have joined their ancestors in the realm where earthly titles become meaningless, where crowns dissolve into light, where love and power merge into something beyond mortal comprehension. Memory flows like the river, carrying scenes from a life lived at the intersection of history and legend. I see myself at 18, standing in this same garden after my coronation, breathing night air sweet with possibility, planning campaigns and alliances that would secure Egypt's independence for generations. The woman who dreamed such dreams feels like a stranger now, someone whose innocence about the cost of power seems touching and tragic, whose faith in love's capacity to reshape politics seems naive, yet somehow more truthful than the cynicism that experience has taught.
The water deepens as it approaches the sea, and I follow its flow toward the harbor, where Roman ships wait like vultures around carrion, where Octavian's representatives prepare terms of surrender that will transform Pharaoh into prisoner, goddess into curiosity for triumphal parades that celebrate the reduction of ancient majesty to Roman trophy. But rivers choose their own courses toward the sea, and queens, I have learned, can choose their own paths toward eternity. The lotus blossoms that float past my feet release fragrances that speak in the oldest language, the vocabulary of sense that bypasses human consciousness to communicate directly with the soul's understanding. They whisper of transformations that await those brave enough to release their grip on familiar forms, of beauties that emerge when mortals accept disillusion as prelude to resurrection, of peace that comes when struggle yields to flow, when resistance melts into acceptance of currents larger than individual will. The stars begin to fade as dawn approaches, their light surrendering to the sun that has witnessed every pharaoh's reign, that will outlive every empire, that connects this moment to the cosmic cycles that reduce human drama to brief episodes in stories too vast for mortal minds to fully comprehend. Yet in that vast context, individual love still matters, personal courage still resonates, the choices made by single hearts still echo in frequencies that transcend the boundaries between life and death. I close my eyes and feel the river's pulse against my ankles, the eternal rhythm that has shaped Egyptian civilization, that has carried the prayers of millions to the Mediterranean, that will continue flowing long after Alexandria's lights have been extinguished, long after Latin replaces Greek in academic discourse, long after the last person who remembers Cleopatra's face has been gathered into the silence that claims all memory.
The water speaks in voices I recognize. Caesar's measured tones planning campaigns that will never be fought. Marcus's passionate declarations of love that will never be fulfilled. My children's laughter from afternoons when the future seemed negotiable, when tomorrow appeared to be something we could create together through sufficient application of intelligence and will. Those voices merge with the river's eternal song, becoming part of the music that connects all moments, all hearts, all dreams that have ever been dreamed beside waters that flow toward mysteries too profound for earthly understanding. The Nile calls me toward the completion that awaits all stories, toward the transformation that changes queens into legends, mortals into myths, women into wonders that inspire future generations to dream beyond the limitations that circumstance appears to impose on human possibility. Tonight, beside waters that have blessed Egypt since the world began, I prepare to answer that ancient call, to join the eternal flow that carries all pharaohs home to the source from which divine authority originally emerged. The silence settles around me like golden dust from tombs that hold the wisdom of ages, soft as silk, deep as the space between heartbeats, complete as the pause between the final word of prayer and the first breath of transformation. The oil lamps have burned low in their holders, their flames reducing to glimmers that dance like fireflies in darkness, like souls preparing for journey to realms where light needs no earthly fuel to maintain its eternal burning. My voice, which once commanded armies and charmed emperors, grows quiet now, becoming whisper, becoming thought, becoming the barely audible vibration that connects all consciousness to the source from which it emerged and to which it returns when the performance of individuality concludes. The words I have spoken throughout this long night float in the air around me like incense smoke, like prayers released to gods who understand that confession is the final gift mortals can offer, the last treasure that belongs entirely to the giver. The golden serpent bracelet that circles my arm grows warm against my skin, its metal absorbing the heat of blood that flows according to rhythms older than dynasties, pulse that connects this moment to the first moment when life stirred in primordial waters, when consciousness looked upon itself and chose to become something more than eternal sleep. The cobra's eyes seem to glow with inner fire, with knowledge that transcends the boundary between symbol and reality, between protection and transformation. The Nile flows past my garden with the patience of eternity, its voice becoming lullaby, becoming the gentle sound that mothers make when they rock children toward peaceful sleep, when they sing wordless songs that communicate love too deep for language, too complete for explanation. The river carries my confessions toward the Mediterranean, toward waters that will mingle my words with salt tears of every woman who has ever loved beyond the boundaries of possibility, who has ever chosen dignity over survival. The incense has nearly burned away, its last tendrils rising toward heaven like spirits ascending, like the final breath of dreams that have served their purpose, that have taught their lessons, that now release their hold on earthly form to become inspiration for future hearts that will dare to love empires into existence, dare to believe that mortal passion can reshape the geography of the possible. The incense has nearly burned away, its last tendrils rising toward heaven like spirits ascending, like the final breath of dreams that have served their purpose, that have taught their lessons, that now release their hold on earthly form to become inspiration for future hearts that will dare to love empires into existence. Dare to believe that mortal passion can reshape the geography of the possible. The incense has nearly burned away, its last tendrils rising toward heaven like spirits ascending, like the final breath of dreams that have served their purpose, that have taught their lessons, that now release their hold on earthly form to become inspiration for future hearts that will dare to love empires into existence, dare to believe that mortal passion can reshape the geography of the possible.
My children sleep in chambers that echo with the ghost of lullabies I sang when they were small enough to hold, when their needs could be satisfied with warmth and milk, and the simple assurance that someone existed whose primary purpose was ensuring their happiness. Now they sleep toward futures I cannot guarantee, toward possibilities I cannot predict, toward destinies that will unfold according to mathematics beyond maternal calculation. Yet something of my love will travel with them, invisible protection that no conqueror can confiscate, no empire can diminish. The stars fade as dawn approaches, their ancient light dissolving into the greater radiance that births each day, that promises renewal even in the midst of endings, that transforms every conclusion into prelude for stories not yet imagined. The lighthouse beam sweeps across waters that reflect dying starlight and approaching sunrise, illuminating the threshold between night and day, between one world and another, between the life that was lived and the legend that will survive when flesh returns to dust from which it came.